Morning, everyone. Um, Today we're going to wrap up um, this essay by George Rosh, Rasha, um, with the subtitle of Emma Jung. Um, and Emma is obviously a very important figure in Jung's life. She was Jung's wife for over 50 years before her death. And let's see, there's a lot to say about Emma, but I'm not going to say too much extemporaneously to begin with. I'm just going to read from Mr. Rasha's essay, and I will monitor the YouTube chat. Okay, so we are in page 206 of Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, and this is volume 2 of the series. The series contains about 70 essays by Jungian analysts talking about their perspective on Jungian psychology. So, I will begin. I don't quite have my screen set up yet. Hello, Michelle. Hello. How are you today?
Greetings. Hi.
Your hair is looking different.
Yeah, I usually have it up in a ponytail because it's
Uh-huh.
in my way and I don't have time for it.
Yeah. It looks great though. Just for
Well, thanks.
just for the record.
Aw, thank you.
Anyway, okay. So I'm reading about Emma Jung, and we can chat about it as we go along. But let me read the first segment about it. Who paid the bills? For the following observations, I am indebted to Nadia Neri and Imelda Gaudissart. Barbara Hanna also wrote about the situation pertaining to Jung and his wife, Emma Raschenbach. She, she comments on the situation thusly. It seems hard that just at the time he was tried to the uttermost by his confrontation with the unconscious, Jung had also to deal with perhaps the most difficult problem a married man ever has to face: the fact that he can love his wife and another woman simultaneously. But the one problem belonged to the other, and they were really two facets of the same problem. Although he had not yet recognized the archetype of the anima, this figure is the nearest to a man of all the inner figures, and she is above all the bridge to and the mediator between the man and his unconscious. Jung also did not yet know that the anima frequently projects herself into a real woman, and that this projection endows that woman with the whole numinous quality of the unconscious. Hannah also, unquote, okay. Hannah also writes about the pain that all three had to suffer. She quotes Jung: "The kernel of all jealousy is lack of love." She continues: "What saved the situation was that there was no lack of love in any of the three. Jung was able to give both his wife and Tony a most satisfactory amount, and both women really loved him. I do not think that Jung lost his head, and I suppose that he took the message of his unconscious seriously, and it did not commit the same error that Tony as possibly he with Tony as possibly he did with Sabina. That is, he did not make Tony dependent on him. This is about understanding the transformation of his anima from a blind to a seeing one. This is what may happen in a true active imagination. Then its figures are real and not symbols. We do not know much about how Emma felt in those years. When Sabina entered the scene, Emma had already one child and was pregnant with the second of the five she would bear. The first pregnancies are always not just a gift, but also a threat for a young couple. In both the young mother and the young father, their respective mother and father complexes are activated along with all the connected doubts and questionings of their self esteem. We know about Carl's problematic image of his mother, as mentioned above. One can only imagine how Emma was suffering, but she was also obviously aware of a deeper meaning of the difficult constellation, as shown in a paper she presented in 1916 in the Psychological Club, where she spoke about guilt. Imelda Gaudissart writes in her study about femme auteur de Jung, quote, "It is striking now to realize that the representation given by Emma on this occasion is, above all, a profound reflection on the subject of guilt feelings. This raises the question of the extent to which its content can be read as an echo of the letter sent by Emma some years earlier to Freud concerning her distress at Carl's adventure with Sabine Spielrein. Did not Emma, in this lecture, give expression to the personal search that she has been compelled to conduct in order to overcome a situation that she had experienced as catastrophic? Had she not interpreted her struggle as a test imposed by destiny rather than as an outcome of personal fate? Unquote. Already in this lecture, Emma spoke about the Grail legend, where Percival fails to ask the crucial question about the suffering of the Fisher King. The traditional ways of dealing with a critical situation are not sufficient to cope with the challenges of destiny, says Emma in this lecture, but one has rather to accept personal guilt and responsibility to acquire the Holy Grail. It is reasonable to assume, quote, "It is reasonable to assume that this presentation was addressed to an audience most of whom were acquainted with the nature of the difficulties that Emma herself faced," writes Gaudissart. Okay, I'm going to stop there. That's 2 pages worth. And um, you want to have any comments so far,
Um,
Mich?
well, I have this book. It's by Robert A. Johnson.
Okay, is it she or what is it?
It's The Fisher King and the Handless Maiden.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
And I got this when I first was interested in Carl Jung. And I didn't know anything. I just picked up books and I ran across this guy and I just realized that the what the subtitle of this book meant. It says understanding the wounded feeling function in masculine and feminine psychology. I had no idea. I just saw that the other day and was like flabbergasted. I was like, wow. just
Yeah.
hit me upside the head.
Well, Carl and Emma certainly lived it as I have lived it. And so they managed to work their way through it. Carl had the advantage of being a psychiatrist when the Red Book period began. He was already a made psychiatrist and been practicing for over 10 years. Um, and when it happened to me, I did not have the advantage of not only that, but any psychology whatsoever. And so I can certainly say that this rings true. However, I was decapitated uh, because when I returned from Japan, um, my and I was there for 5 years in business and 3 years, 16 years earlier in high school. So obviously, Japan was always a part of my fate in some way, or things international, let's say. Um, and and that was not my first wife's experience. She was the third child, and she um, had had a father who was very stolid citizen, I would say. He he had literally built the house that they lived in on the Niagara River around the family. He had he
He had the
had the
money.
well he had no, he didn't have the money at the
Oh, he
beginning.
didn't?
No,
Oh,
he had but he had enough money so that he could have a basement dug. And so he had a basement, and he I guess he had gotten the slats of the house up, but no walls. There might have been a roof over it somehow. And he literally built the house around my wife's family, but my wife was 9 months old when that happened. And she didn't necessarily appreciate or understand the trials of an entrepreneur. And her her father was a very steady Eddie guy at home. He came in and he would take care of the house. He was quite a handyman, and he also kept the grass. He had a huge lawn, and he kept the grass in immaculate shape on his little tractor. And that was never going to be me. I was never going to be like that because I am allergic to everything that's green and grows. So the couple of times that I cut their grass, I almost killed myself with a power mower. Up on the side of a hill, I pushed this thing up on the side of the hill, and all of a sudden lost my footing, and I was going down, and the power mower's going, and flips over on me. Fortunately, I was smart enough to keep hold of the handle. Otherwise, I probably would have literally lost an arm or something. Um,
well, that's
but
fortunate.
pardon?
It's fortunate that nothing happens.
Yeah, it was quite comical, actually. Um, but uh, my wife, of course, saw her. This is my ex-wife now. She saw her father as her champion, and um, as her hero, and he built up an entrepreneurial business, which was amazing. Um, do you know the if you go to any lake, especially in the northern part of the U.S., and you see boat lifts next to docks, little boat lifts for small boats. Now I'm talking about for 14 to 20-foot boats, but it has this big round wheel on it. And you use that wheel to crank up the boat because they weren't power lifts in those days. So people had these big wheels, and most of us have seen those in the United States. We've seen them all over the country, and he invented that. and
Oh, that's amazing.
and he and then he went on from that to invent various roofing hoists. So he was very useful in the small building industry after the war when people were building up houses. And there were a lot of small contractors around, and still are, I guess. But getting roofing material up on the roof is a non-trivial task. And so he had built several different kinds of roofing hoists, one that went up on a ladder, and some that you set up a little crane on top of the roof and it actually builds the stuff, picks the stuff up. And he manufactured those. And so he made a lot of money, okay, during his um, building up of his life. And and my ex-wife expected that. Okay, that was her template for what a husband should be. But my career had been very different because I had spent so much time in Japan. I had her in Japan with me for 5 years, and our youngest daughter was born there. Um, and it was in some ways quite comical because when she was born, she weighed 3,500 grams, but the largest Japanese baby that was in the hospital weighed 2,500 grams. So she was huge, um, and by Japanese standards, and the doctors were quite surprised. But in any case,
Story of my life growing up.
right. But in any case, when we came back to the U.S., my wife desperately wanted me to take up the practice of law. I'm an attorney in New York, and I had practiced law for 5 years before we went to Japan, before I went into business in Japan. And she thought it would be oh hunky dory if I practiced law. But what she didn't appreciate was I also had studied while I was in the Marine Corps. I studied Mandarin Chinese. So my career was already very well started as an international career with two Asian languages, Japanese and Chinese. And and I was an attorney MBA, so I knew my way around a business. Um, and I absolutely detested the practice of law. And I'll give you a sense of it. Uh, one night about midnight, one of my clients, this was when I was still taking matrimonial cases, one of my clients called me up at midnight and said that, um, well, it was probably 12:30, I guess. She says, that her new husband, she had been married once before, and her first husband had set her up in a house. It was a beautiful home, had wonderful furnishings and collections and et cetera, but he had died. And so she had this house outright, and she had met this gentleman um, at Eastman Kodak, which is the main employer at the time. And and while she was away on her evening shift, she had the 4 to 12 shift one time. Um, he had brought his four children, adult children, in with a U-Haul and packed everything in the house out. So when she called me at 12:30 at night, um, there was nothing left. There wasn't a molecule left in the house. They took everything. And
Yeah, I have an ex-husband and I have a first marriage and he took everything.
oh, jeez.
Took everything. But I mean,
Hi, Deborah.
that's
Nice to
divorce for
see
you.
you. Pardon?
That's divorce for you, but
Yeah. So I said, don't call me, call the police. And she importuned me, so she begged me to come over. And finally, I went over, and I probably got to her house about 1 in the morning, and I stayed till after 4 because by the time I got there, there was a police officer there who was taking a police report. And when I went home at like 4:30 in the morning, my ex-wife was freaked out about the fact that I had gone out to see another woman at 1:30 in the morning at
yeah,
12:30 at night, which was fair enough. But and I just I don't know, my psyche is not such that I can deal with people's um man's not nice,
child
huh? Man, something to
family
man,
issues.
man's I don't know. There's a saying, but man's not being nice to other human beings, and I did not care for that, and I hadn't cared for it. So the next day, I went to another lawyer in Rochester who wanted to take the 5 matrimonial cases that I had at the time, and he agreed to take those over, and and then, from that moment, I really decided that I didn't want to practice law. And it was a shame because I spent 8 years going to law school, which I enjoyed very much because I'm a nerd. And so I liked studying law, but I didn't like practicing law. And so, um, anyway, I mean, what happened then was that I had occasion to meet my first wife, and I'm not, or second wife, and I'm not going to go into great detail about that. But what happened was I met my second wife. I had been married for 17 years, and I met my second wife on sort of pseudo business circumstances. And she walks into the room and she's wearing this bright red silk dress. And I was decapitated totally. Okay. I began to communicate with her by email. And within 4 months, I knew her far better than I knew my first wife. Um, and uh, and I picked up my gear and walked out on January the 2nd, 1986. And so we are, and so we have been together now this January for 40 years, which I guess the second marriage took. Because she has lots of interests in Asia that um
Cross your fingers.
well, yeah, I mean, yeah, we're solid these days. Okay. But and and I have stayed in cordial communication with my first wife, but I just could not stay there because she kept getting into these fights with me, and she would beat me up about everything that we had disagreed about for 17 years. And so we would rehash it every time there was a disagreement. And I, I couldn't change her, and I didn't know what to do about it. I didn't know much about psychology, and I said, bye, not me. It ain't me, babe.
Well, there does come a point in a relationship where like sometimes two people just bring out the worst in each other.
Yeah,
And when it gets to that point, the best part, the you should walk away, even though
yeah,
at that
yeah,
time the toxic cycle is so strong.
yeah. It's you have to go to your corner and, cool it. And and we did go to a marriage counselor. I had insisted on having a Jungian marriage counselor, but he was an analyst, but he was, um, I just hated the process of analysis because all he would do is ask us questions. And then we'd explain that, and then he'd ask more questions, and we wanted to know, let's get to the chase, man. What's happening here? Is this marriage going to last or not? And he says, I don't know. And, now I do understand that, you have to go through these developments, these psychological developments, and and he was trying to get us to go through those, um, and he can't judge whether the marriage should go on or not. But my mother and my ex-wife both thought that it should. So, it should continue on, and that this analyst should just order us to get back in the marriage and carry on.
It's not that easy.
And it doesn't work that way, no.
Yeah.
And so anyway, in those days I knew nothing about Jung, and it wasn't until a year and a half later that I even found the Myers-Briggs through another anima figure. But anyway, so men are attracted to other women. Sometimes women are attracted to other men uh, for various things, and it's best to say, okay, we grew up, and now we know that this isn't the right thing for us. And so I regretted it that I hadn't been able to keep a marriage together, but by the same token, I never have doubted it in the 40 years that since that happened, I never doubted that it was the correct decision. And so it was ordained by fate. In Jungian terms, we would say it was ordained by fate. And you know, some things are that way. And so, uh, anyway, Deborah says 17 years is a pretty decent effort, and I very much appreciate Deborah C being here because she is in Sydney, where it is midnight, zero dark 30, in
Yeah.
Sydney. So I appreciate that. Um, let's see. There's some other comments here. Yeah, Deborah says family law is the worst for legal practice, no doubt. And Sheree says, well, most families work it out alone. Yeah, okay. And Jung didn't know what he knew after 40 years of writing and after the uh, Red Book time. So he too had this experience, right? And but he was able to work through it. He had a lot more education, I would say, than I had, even though I had 10 years of college. I didn't have the right education yet at that point. Um, Sheree says, not just between man and wife, X or not, is it how one teaches the pattern and handed it down in the culture one is brought up in, I suppose. I used to wonder, my ex-wife's parents had 4 children, and I knew that 50% of marriages end in divorce. And for the longest time, I couldn't figure out which of these marriages of the four would end up in divorce. And I said, it wouldn't be mine. I didn't, it never occurred to me at the time that it could be mine. So anyway, um, yeah, yeah, because as Shuri says, my side against your side, jealousy, greed, and fear. Sisters-in-laws, brother-in-laws get involved. The mother holds the family together, and not always perfectly. Um, and Deborah says alternative dispute resolution methods are the best. Australia is pretty good with no fault divorce, etc. It's just the client's unresolved emotions are the heavy lifting. Absolutely. Um,
Yeah, and apparently you can't, or I didn't know because I mean I've never gotten divorced before, but you I took me forever to get him to sign the papers.
uh,
He wouldn't do it, and it's like I guess we're still married, even though I want you to sign this piece of paper.
yeah. In my day, we still had to go through divorce, so we had to, actually go to court, and I won't go into that long story, but in any case, we got separated, and I stayed connected to my daughters, and through thick and thin. And I have a cordial relationship with my ex-wife who remarried. She married a man that was more like her father, and so she was happy for the last 40 years. She actually got remarried before I did.
Did
Anyway,
you see that coming?
um, oh yes, and one of the reasons I decided, one of the logical reasons I decided to proceed was that she was still young. And, we were under 40, and she could be attractive to a man who um, already had 4 children. And, uh, but we've Debbie and me, my current wife and I, have accepted him and his 4 children, all of whom we know, and and I think my ex-wife is still rueful, but she sees that it was the right decision for her, and she wanted stability, and so we were living in my hometown at the time, and so she accuses me of dropping her off in my hometown, which is in effect what happened. Um, it's sort of a bad joke, but anyway, all these things happen. Going back to Emma Jung, though, Emma was quite a bit younger than Carl, and he was already a made psychiatrist and medical doctor the first time he met her. He met her when she was 14, and in the late 19th century, there was no cure for syphilis. And so the crazy thing is, Emma's mother had worked as Carl's babysitter when Carl was a baby. And so she used to push his pram, and he remembered Emma's mother um, from the time that he was in a pram, right?
Oh, so
Like a year or
that's
two old at the most.
like an imprinting.
Yeah, and so her and so the funny comment here about um, who pays the bills or something. Uh, Emma was the third wealthiest woman in Switzerland. Her father had founded the IWC watch company, which still exists, and so he was quite a successful businessman. Um, However, like Lord Randolph Churchill, they did some things they shouldn't have done, and they both caught syphilis, and there was no cure for syphilis in the late 19th century. And so Emma's mother wanted to keep the matter um, the fact that her husband was dying of syphilis, she wanted to keep it confidential, and therefore she chose Carl as the doctor to come and see her husband on a regular basis. And so the first time Carl saw Emma, she was 14 years old, and she was on a stairway, and he looked up at her, and I don't know, something clicked, but he said to himself at the time, I'm going to marry that woman. And in fact, they did marry. Um, Not, well, a ways after that. I don't know exactly what the age was of Emma. I think Carl would have been 28, I guess, at the time. He was born in 1875, and I think they got married in 1903. Um, and so Carl must have been about 7, 8 years older. He was just a doctor when he was being going to see Mr. Rauschenbach, who ultimately did die of syphilis. Um, anyway, as did Lord Randolph Churchill, uh, and it wasn't that necessarily in Lord Randolph Churchill's case. Um, he uh, in those days they would have a bachelor party, and the bachelor would end up with a woman on the night before his wedding, and so Lord Randolph had this experience, and then he got married. Winston Churchill was conceived within days of that marriage, and before the syphilis in Lord Randolph became apparent. And so Jenny Jerome, who was one of these American heiresses who got hired or married, not hired, married into the British nobility. She uh, she couldn't have marital relations with Lord Randolph after this became evident, and so she became quite the lady about town. Um, but apparently she was quite beautiful, and so on. Anyway, um, all right. So moving on, that was the beginning of Carl's relationship with Emma, and so when Carl had this experience with Sabina Spielrein, Emma was already with her second child, and she wanted to stick to it, and that's the way they were in those days. And uh, she had plenty of money, so Carl could do whatever he wanted in terms of his research and studies. And so he built this fine, beautiful house in Küsnacht, Switzerland, near a suburb of Zurich. And and they lived in that house their whole lives. Um, and Carl could pretty much do as he pleased, and therefore he could be an intellectual. And but he did
Maybe
practice.
they both let each other be, who they were, as much
Right,
as society allows.
right. And so uh, Carl went through this Red Book time, and Emma said at one point, "I'm grateful to for Tony for getting Carl through the Red Book time because he was psychologically um, brittle at that time. He was in trouble at the Red Book time, the time we're talking about, and um, and Emma was up to her ears in children, and so Tony was able to help Carl understand what was going on in his own psyche, and she basically became his shrink. But in those days, we didn't have ethical standards applied to psychologists, so um, for men or women. And so one thing led to another. And that, I don't know how often it happens these days, but if you're going to go to a man or, the person of the opposite sex as your analyst, boy, you're playing with fire. You have to be careful.
Yeah,
And
projection.
yeah, but
Yeah.
in the profession, the analyst would be careful, would know that that's what was happening to them. But to me, boy, I couldn't be a psychoanalyst because imagining myself spending an hour in somebody else's psyche 7 times a day, and 7 different psyches. Oh my God, it'd make you crazy. And
Mm.
Carl saw 6 to 8 patients a day, even during the Red Book period. And
Yeah, but in the Red Book, when he meets the vagabond
Young,
guy who's like, I'm in love with this girl, I got into this fight in the bar,
yeah,
I need a job, but I don't want to find a job. That whole like questioning part with the hobo is really like his skill as a psychiatrist, like towards that figure is like really incredible. Like,
yeah, yeah, because obviously that hobo is part of him. And so he was literally able to interrogate his own unconscious in a semi-conscious way when he was doing this. He did it by keeping the black books, by keeping notes of what was going on. And I related very strongly to it because the same basic thing was happening to me when I was writing this novel that I wrote, which um, for 8 months my anima occupied my mind. I could not get away from it. I was totally obsessed. And until I had told this story, which is her individuation, the term that Jung finally came up with, it's the individuation of my anima. I didn't know I was telling that story in 1993 when I wrote it, but I would, what I did was I took notes. I wrote the story as I went, and I finally found my way out of it. It took 8 months, Jung had his red book, his main intense red book period in 10 weeks. I cannot imagine the the 80% of the red book took place in 10 weeks. And so if that had happened to me, I would have been lost. The fact that it lasted 8 months allowed me to digest it bit by bit in some way, right? Um, and and I put it away for 16 years because, as I say, there are erotic passages in that book, and I was in the middle of my business career, and I said, "Geez, I can't publish a pornographic novel." And we'll call it erotic for polite company, but um, I said I couldn't publish that. And yet I had shown the novel to about 100 women that I was working with, and every single one of them said that they loved it, which was a big surprise to me, because my conscious mind thought that some aspects of it were somewhat abusive, um, but I think it actually reflects the experience of many women, and therefore the women related to it. Even my mother and my current wife loved it.
Yeah, I loved it. But I was reading a piece about like why like erotic literature is so big with women now,
Mhm.
and like the conclusions, or the conclusions of the writer was that like in modern day dating it's not as dramatic as it used to be. Like before, people like didn't know where the other person was all the time. Like
Mhm.
you couldn't text them whenever, and then if they
Yeah,
didn't text you back, you couldn't block them or write a Facebook post about how terrible they are.
right, right. All that stuff.
Right.
Right. So people had to accept the ambiguity of the relationship. Uh,
Yeah. But like that literature is so popular now because like the drama, the unknowing, the transformation, like that's kind of non-existent in the modern dating world. Like,
yeah,
yeah, it's just different. So I guess that's why that literature is like exploding right now.
yeah. So in any case, moving on, let's see. Let's see. Deborah says, Cherie says, I was abused by two psychiatrists at a young age. Boy, that's shocking, as Deborah says. Then Cherie says, after being abused by another older man who was an alcoholic, much older than at the age of 10, not a member of my family, nothing is shocking in life, my dear. And Deborah says, after my parents bashed my sisters for seeing me, I'd left home. A psychiatrist was called in. He announced to me that I was supposedly in love with my father and jealous of my mother. We are all being traumatized by all societies today. Absolutely. Uh, and Arcafani says, you have the idealized version of love that is akin to the idea of Hiraeth. I don't know what that is. My father, Deborah says, my father was abusive toward me. The Children's Protective Society social worker called me in. Uh, and she said, why are your parents like this? I explained that their part past trauma. She said, well, there's only one thing I don't understand. How come you're so normal? Because these are the worst parents I've ever dealt with. Um, well, I, I'm shocked. I'm shocked by how much incest there is in the world and lots of what other things related to inter, intersexual relations. Um, and when I finally saw the Red Book, I said to myself, wow, if the greatest psychologist, psychiatrist of the 20th century could have an experience like he had in the Red Book, then I guess I'm not crazy. And so Jung kind of became my shrink, but um, I think a lot more people go through these things than you think. My my dear friend Meltem Arıkan, who is a playwright and novelist from Turkey, wrote novels primarily about incest. And, I had interacted with that novel because she wanted it to be translated, and someone in Turkey had translated it in a pure this equals this kind of way. And I had to actually translate the translator, but I had to get very intimate with that novel, and which involves incest, and I was really shocked to hear what goes on in Turkey, and I'd never been aware of it consciously in the U.S., but I guess it does happen a lot in the U.S. as well. Um, Deborah
Yeah.
says,
The
Deborah,
thing that is so shocking, like when we hear these things that do happen to a lot of people, is
yeah,
like for me, it's like I'm hit with how those things are covered up and not discussed,
mm,
and which only adds to like the
yeah,
moral injury of the whole thing and makes it harder to
precisely,
talk about.
right,
Yeah, and there is like a lot of emotional things like when one has, their parents and, like
yeah,
growing up, my dad was gone a lot. So like
mhm.
I feel like in a lot of ways, like I was like the husband to my mother. Yeah.
Yeah, I think daughters often have to serve that role when men are away. And but I mean, at the time that my ex-wife was trying to keep me in the marriage, she she sent to me two books about what it feels like to be a child of a broken home. And she hadn't read these books, and basically they said, well, children of broken homes are often geniuses. For example, Leonardo da Vinci and all kinds of other people were, children of broken homes. And oh, by the way, it's archetypal for the father to be away. And if you think about it, fathers were always away. I mean, maybe not in the last 2,000 years, but um, in our biological heritage, the male has to defend the female, and that roles often ended in death, um, and uh, and the women would have to make life on their own. And, we're in the West, we're hypercritical about Muslims because they allow four wives in Saudi Arabia. But the reality is that until the early 20th century, certainly, um, that was the welfare system of society. In other words, um, men would go away and they'd fight in wars and they'd end up dead, and there'd be one left, and he would take in the wives of people he knew as a kind of welfare system. And in Islam, if you do that, you have to treat both wives or all wives equally. And so, there is a moral and logical reason for it. I mean, we haven't had uh, public assistance for most of the existence of our species. I mean, that's an invention of I don't know, the last 100 years, I suppose, where we have public assistance. And um, we if you go back to the American or the Great Depression, which was a depression all over the world, there wasn't public assistance back then. And so, I mean, there was assistance, but it was assistance provided by um, churches and things like that, charitable organizations. It wasn't a government function. So, so we have to, if we understand what the rationale was behind the permission to have four wives, um, wow, it made a lot of sense, really. Because women would end up as widows and men would take them in, and the deal was that they had to treat them equally. And so I do know one that I'm fairly close to who um, had two husbands, and she's happens to be the sister of a close friend of mine. And so every other day she would be at lunch with him, and every other day she would be with the other husband, and she loved it because she got a break from the other guy. and and so she was able to deal with it herself as well. Um, and on the other hand, it's not something that they go out and willy-nilly do, because I did know I've only known one Saudi who had two wives, and it was hell on earth for him because one of the two wives did not know about the other one, and he was constantly on the phone juggling his relationship with the wife that didn't know. Oh my God. You can imagine. Oh God, the stuff we get into. But, you know, you have to be realistic and understand, you know, German women after World War II, German and British women, there were not a lot of men around. And so, what do you think happened? Of course it did. Um, so anyway, um, going back to Deborah, she says, my father was an alcoholic, but both parents are trauma-induced narcissists. It was very difficult indeed. They would blame me for everything, everything. And Cherie says, since 1 a.m. this morning, I first watched John Pilger interviewing Julian Assange before it was complicated with WikiLeaks. And Deborah says the freaking psychiatrist was blaming me. Uh, at least I knew he was nuts, though Freudian. uh, you know, the logical approach. Let's logically work this out, right? Then I finally got to see the award. Cherie says, then I finally got to see the award-winning documentary that won an Oscar, quote, "No Other Land," unquote. The friendship of Basil Audra and Yuval Abraham. I have seen many documentaries on wars with guns murdering human beings, uh, rapes, prisons, girls, boys, men, and women. Yeah, don't get yourself sent to prison if you're a man. That's for sure. Um, and especially if you're a young man. Um, and Cherie says, my psychiatrists were overdosing me and having their pleasure with me. Yeah. And so, you know, James Hillman said, we've had 100 years of psychotherapy and things are getting worse. And so he was not, in the end, he gave up his practice as an analyst and stuck to his writing because although many people thought he was the lion of analysis, in he did not feel that it had been that worthy. I mean, each of us, I think in the end, we have to understand, and I have to go back to Jaffe's quote, his single sentence. The whole purpose of Jung's psychology is to make accessible the healing power of the unconscious. That's it. Okay, there's nothing more. Okay, I don't think any psychiatrist has a magical panacea that anything that they can say or drug they can give that will automatically solve your problems. Ultimately, your problems have to be solved within the sphere of your own life. And what a psychiatrist or an analyst can do is allow your unconscious to heal you. They don't heal you, they don't solve the problem, but they at least open a conduit to so that your own unconscious can heal you. That's all they do, in my view. Okay, and I admit that I'm not a psychoanalyst or a psychiatrist at all. I don't know anything about the two professions, really. I certainly don't know anything about psychotherapy per se. However, I know a few things from my life, and what I know tells me that this rings very true, that all solutions have to come from you. And, what religions did for us is they made it possible for healing to happen. And so they created rituals, marriages and funerals, for example, that allowed for healing. Because if someone died, a funeral doesn't help the person who's died. When you're dead, you don't know you're dead. It's only difficult for your family. When you're stupid, it works the same way. And so funerals are what they do, whether people understand their purpose or not. What they do is they open a, a make accessible your own healing power from the loss of your loved one. That's what they do. And um, and in my case, my psyche told me very clearly that when my parents and my brother died, that nothing had really changed in terms of my relationship to them. I still carry them in my heart, absolutely unchanged from before, from when they were alive. And the only difference is I can't have more experiences with them, but you don't actually lose someone at their death. You don't lose them. They're there. They're in your heart, and they're going to stay there. And if a funeral is successful in opening a passage to your unconscious, then you will understand that clearly. And it's irrational, but that's what it is. And, and a wedding is about a family that brought up a young girl, giving her up to a man that's not a member of the family often, almost always. And, um, and you have to heal the fact that you've lost somebody in your family. That's what a wedding is. But it's a ritual to see that this couple is to be together and that they're going to carry the species further in their marriage. Um, so
Well, like religious experiences, like from my understanding, are like experiences that change you. Like anything that changes you, like is profound because changing is really hard.
yeah, no doubt. And as I said, or as I've said a few times, I think that all of my primary memories, I mean, obviously there are a lot of things that, okay, if you take me down a certain path, I can remember certain things that happen. But the things that come to mind, the things that are about who I am, those were all numinous experiences. Those were all religious experiences, every single one of them. And I'm not saying that they were all good or profound, but all of them were numinous. And so if and numinosity happens by synchronicity. So this situation is right for something, for a numinous reaction from your psyche to occur. Okay. Um, so let's see. Deborah says, I did see him let's see, I think I better go back. So Deborah says Jung is superior to Freud, in my opinion. Well, Freud was a rationalist, and Jung was never about the rational side of the mind after the very beginning of the Red Book. So if you read the first two pages, I'm sorry, two paragraphs of the Red Book, you will understand that from that time on, from 1913 on, Carl Jung was never about rationality. Carl Jung was about what irrational things occur in a human life that need help. So, so Deborah says, I had blocked it out, by the way, only after my father died. Some of it came back to me. But what did he say to the shrink to make him blame me? I never had any treatment or consultation, just called in to receive the outcome of my parents' treatment. Uh, I do have some memories, but partial only. and have no desire to revisit them, let alone explore them. I did get to see him in the coffin, though. It was important to me to see he was finally dead. Well, I mean, things that are horrific in your memory, you probably shouldn't call back up. It was bad enough the first time you experienced them. Why burden your physical life with painful experience? I don't think that they should be called back up necessarily. Unless you're in analysis and you have somebody professional working with you. I did, let's see. I did see him the morning of his death out of the side of my vision. I saw I didn't have anger toward him. Then the phone rang and my brother said he was dead, but I already knew I was reading, and it was a book my father would have loved. I was in a state of meditation, and in a kind of joy, I saw he had one person on either side of him like guides. I hadn't been able to sleep on the nights he died and felt a struggle, like the need to throw something off. And it was him struggling to accept he was actually dying. Uh, and Deborah says, well, Freud wasn't even actually logical. Yeah, that now we're getting too deep because I don't want to talk about Freud and Jung. I want to talk about Emma here. So and Deborah says, I think regression therapy is potentially dangerous and triggering. I didn't know he was dying. Well, yeah, we all we actually our psyche protects us. Um, I guess I was talking about this in the advanced reading group, but there's a story in Donald Colshan's book about trauma. Uh, and in that book, he talks about a woman who was at her desk, and her 5-year-old daughter comes to see her, and she says, could you take this message to um, her father? And she sends a note with the little girl to her father. And the little girl comes back crying and says, the angel won't let me go in. And her mother said, oh, pish posh, and sends her back again, and still more tears. And the little girl comes back and says, no, the angel won't let me go in. And the woman finally gets up, and she goes to her husband's study and finds him dead. And so the child didn't see her dead father, she saw an angel. And that's an example of the psyche protecting you from seeing something that maybe is too painful at the moment. Um, and, so anyway, um, we, the fact is, uh, we all suffer these losses. It's part of our human nature. And um, you know, some psychologists say, well, have your dessert first because you never know when you're going to die. And that's a fact. I mean, I had a student threaten me on Friday, and you just don't know in my society where there's more than one gun for every human being. Uh, you just don't know the next day will bring. Um, so Deborah says, I feel I'm pretty okay overall, but obviously it's hardest because of the family, which scapegoats and blames the one who is most conscious. Um, and Cherie says, what if it really was an angel? It really was an angel. I'm not saying it wasn't an angel. I am saying it was an angel. Um, I'm the man that said I met Mephistopheles once. So, don't ask me to deny angels. I do not deny them. Um, and the best advice I can give, Deborah, or you don't need my advice, obviously, because you're a grown woman and I've met you now, and I know that you're a thoughtful woman and so on. So, as move on. Don't just you can't fix these things. So draw a corral around it in your psyche and move on and don't think about it anymore.
Oh, you know what works is counting.
Counting. Okay.
Counting. Um, yeah, like when your brain starts spinning and you're just like, I can't right now. Counting works. And then I also play this game where I imagine the jungle and I try to name all of the animals I can think.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I imagine and do physically do my painting where, I am often my psyche is often in turmoil because I am working every day, 8 hours a day with troubled youth. And and I've had my life threatened and so on. And so uh, it takes a special kind of person to be able to face that. And if I'm lying in bed thinking about it, I get my painting out and I start doing my painting. But you can meditate however you meditate. This is just the meditation technique that seems to work for me. And so when I'm painting, I'm calling upon my unconscious, and then things work for me. So I don't consider my painting style a panacea for anybody, obviously. I only show it to show you how complex it can become, uh, but I don't sell it. Sometimes I give it away, but I don't sell it yet. Okay, yet. I don't know that if I will ever, um, but the main reason that I do it is to oh, activate my unconscious to give myself access to my unconscious, which in my opinion can be done in any way. Counting is one way that's perfectly valid. And I think everybody has some sort of way that they can get to their unconscious for specific needs, maybe. Michelle, did you want to comment further?
Um, well, I was gonna say in Buddhist philosophy, you know, suffering is a fact of life. And
Yep.
um
So
I
I'm
don't know,
sorry.
just for me, like remembering that it is a part of life, um, it just helps me to not take it so personally because it is
Yeah.
a part of life.
Yeah, life is difficult and then you die, you know.
Yeah.
So we have to get on with it. And hopefully, when I remember when the crash of 2008 uh, happened, um, I definitely had suicidal ideation at that time. And I've had it periodically over my lifetime, but when it does happen, I normally just say to myself, perish that thought. Okay, perish that thought. And that actually works. You know, you know, I don't want that thought to work, be fiddling around in my brain. And one of my neighbors did shoot himself. He went out in a rowboat in the middle of a little lake that we have near where I live, and he killed himself. And he was a successful entrepreneur, but I think he was having some financial difficulties with his business. But um, and I was having financial difficulties too, and but I said to myself, perish that thought every time it came to mind, and I'm still here, and it's 18 years later. So I guess I didn't.
Yeah.
One can hope. uh, and Deborah says, I find it helpful to have a sense of humor about things. It's healthy, and absolutely, because humor comes from the unconscious. It comes from the shadow side. And
Oh,
it
the
may,
trickster.
yeah, and it's it makes you laugh at yourself or laugh at some joke, but normally it applies to you too. And it does help, absolutely. Um, right. Okay, I'm going to read on with Emma here. Okay, so yeah, we've got to move here in order to get through this. So I'm going to read a couple of pages here. Carl had also put Emma on her own feet. He encouraged her to learn Latin and to study everything she could find concerning the Grail legend. Emma became a respected analyst in Zurich and in the 1930s wrote a book about animus and anima. Barbara Hanna was among her first analysands. Gaudissart draws the portrait of an individuated woman who could combine many interests with her task of keeping the family together, caring for her 5 children and her analysands, and for her husband. When Carl had his heart attack in 1944 and was on the verge of dying, Emma moved into the hospital. Quote, for Emma, who watched over her husband unceasingly, this situation provided without any doubt the opportunity to gather under her protecting wing this man suffering the throes of a grave regression of both body and mind. Emma had decided that her husband, during these long weeks, should be kept beyond reach of the outside world. Virtually no one other than his children was allowed to come through the door. Emma had herself moved into the clinic and did not leave it until her husband had recovered sufficiently to be able to return home. One of the very few persons admitted into his preserve was Marie Louise von Franz. Since she was involved in Jung's research on alchemy, Emma considered toward the end of his convalescence that such a visit might stimulate in her husband the desire to renew his grasp on the thread of life. Unquote. Tony was not admitted. Quote, it was thus that 1944 marked an important turning point in the relationship between Carl and Emma as a couple and in the evolution of each of their marriage partners taken separately. Carl actually believed during this illness that he had reached the end of his life. He returned to the land of the living, his return to the land of the living caused a tempest of freedom to rage through his whole mind and being. He felt a strong conviction that the findings amassed over decades could now be assembled to produce works that would bear an increasingly personal stamp. Carl was by this time 69 while Emma was 62. All right, so there's the difference in age. He was 7 years older. Each of them was gradually to embark on the search of a new kind of closeness with the other, for a matured form of love and friendship based on wisdom. Unquote. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he does not mention Emma's presence, in that uh, but in that work, he generally refrains from speaking of the private relationships at all. The weeks in the hospital were very important for Jung. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he speaks about the visions he had during the nights. He writes, filled with the highest possible feeling of happiness. I myself was, so it seemed, in the Partis Ramonum, the garden of pomegranates, and the wedding of the Tifereth and Malkuth was taking place. Or else I was Rabbi Simon ben Jokai, whose wedding in the afterlife was taking place. It was the mystic marriage as it appears in the Kabbalistic. I cannot tell you how wonderful it was. He dreamed further of the marriage of the Lamb and the Hierosgamos of all Father Zeus and Hera in a wonderful setting. These visions were an apotheosis of marriage, and it is as if there in 1944, Carl and Emma came together on a new level of their relationship as spouses. Okay, so one thing I would urge, if you haven't done so already, is that you go to the homepage of this YouTube channel and watch The Analyst and the Rabbi, because this 1944 heart attack experience that Jung was having is very well thoroughly discussed in that one act play, and it's worth your time. I'm going to very quickly myself, I will go get the link because I don't want you to miss it. So just give me a moment here. I have to get it. I Okay, I've got it. Copy the link. Okay. So I'm back, and here is the link. Yeah, somehow I didn't pick it up. Just a minute. Are we still online? Yes, we are, I hope. Um, tab. I think I made a mistake in going to the same tab, but let me go back here. This time I should be able to do it correctly, I hope. Okay, that is the link to the analyst and the rabbi. And in terms of this section that is being discussed here, that contains a very good discussion of the situation for Carl Jung when he had his heart attack in 1944. And it's called The Analyst and the Rabbi. And there are two versions of it on YouTube. One is by professional Jungian analysts, and one is by me and my colleagues. I played Carl Jung in our version. So if you see me in it, you know it's my version, but um, both cover the same ground. And the play was by two very leading Jungian analysts who know a lot about this material. Um, and and they are Mary Stein, who's also the author of this, or the editor of this book. Let's see, how do I do that? Okay, Mary Stein is one of the authors, and the other is Henry Abramovich, who is in Jerusalem. Um, and Mary Stein now lives in Zurich. Okay, now we're up to the conclusion and a remark on Elijah. And so there are, let's see, we have to see one thing. Okay, so Michelle had to leave. Sorry to say, but anyway, we're here and we still have a couple pages to go. Deborah says she gave her father a copy of Mary Street's Reflections. He went ballistic, did not cope well with it. Oh, well, I can't. uh, has the family Cosa Nostra edited out the new editions, and as for the case studies, Well, the first edition of Memory Streams Reflections did have very heavy involvement by the family. And apparently they um, edited out about 50% of the protocols, which was the documentation that Aniela Jaffe had put together for Memory Streams Reflections. My understanding from Louis LaFontaine, who's a dyed-in-the-wool Jungian follower, is that the protocols, which is the entire Memory Streams Reflections, is due to be published by the Bollingen Foundation. And I haven't seen it yet, though. It's a couple of years late based on what I thought it was going to be. Cherie says, we'll try Skip again. I have been back with philosophy overdose and trying to keep up with all those. Last night to Ernest Nagel twice in a year. Um, and uh, and Eridanus says, add one synchronicity and voila, a mistress, discreet. uh, anyway, Deborah says, we need the bourgeoisie. It's often where progress happens, and Jung was having massive insights, which we can only imagine for the period, was very intense. And she says, I give Jung a pass on the affair. Um, do I give him a pass? I would say, um, there's a part of me that doesn't want to, but uh, having had my own experiences of life, I have to. And, you know, humans are humans, and uh, boys will be boys and girls will be girls. And you have to find a way to live. And so, I don't know. It's crazy how many things you can say will trigger people. And I live in a very, um, I would call raw environment every day when I go to my school. And we have to be very careful about what we say and do because we don't know what will be triggered. And and I had an experience with this on Friday that I'm still working through in terms of how to deal with it. Um, yeah, and Deborah says he was only human, and what a difficulty to be such a pioneer of insights at such a time in the world. Right. I mean, Nietzsche had only said God is dead about 20 years or 30 years before, maybe in the mid 1890s. And and Jung Jung's main contribution, it seems to me, is to confirm that God lives where God where God lives and how God goes about doing the work of the Godhead. And I'm not going to assign a gender to God, since women and men have different gods, perhaps, um, and others have other gods. So, Yeah, exactly. He was only human, and what a difficulty to be such a pioneer of insights at such a time in the world. He was very alone, a prototype, in fact. Yes, he certainly was alone, and to his great credit, he kept working at it until he started to find some answers. And you never know where your answers will come from. You never know. And you maybe don't know what answers you need also. Um, in Jung's case, um, he had a sense that alchemy was about his world and that alchemy was sort of this early form of psychology, primitive, of course, but primitive form of psychology. And he needed confirmation in history, and he hadn't been able to find it in Western literature. And it was only in 1928 when Richard Wilhelm, who had been a scholar in China and had translated a book called The Secret of the Golden Flower, which is about Chinese alchemy, that Jung was able to connect up Western alchemy with the secret of the golden flower and understood that's what he was about for the rest of his career. And that happened in 1928. And you can read about that in many places that they refer to Jung's work. And Cherie says, my Aunt Daisy saw things that were not there. She was my best friend. I was very little, and she made me laugh. Her son and his family were ashamed of her, not my side of the family. Well, I think we've all had probably, if you are of a certain age, we've probably all had uh, dizzy aunts and dizzy parents. Um, I certainly had many experiences, including my grandfather talking about being visited by his wife after her death. And, you know, I was then years later, 30 years later, maybe, or 40 years later, even. Now let's see, at least 30 years later, when my brother died and I had similar visitations, and I had enough experience with Jungian psychology at that time so that I could understand what these visitations were because I was visited by my brother twice. And those are real. Those are not imaginary. Those are real things. Um, and please understand that objects of the psyche are reality, they're physical reality. You may not be able to touch them, but it is in their essence that they are real. It's like the angel that the little girl ran into. Um, Whatever it is the daughter saw, um, to her, it was an angel. And I'm sure she remembers it that way even today. Um, and I've seen lots of things. So uh, let's see. Deborah says, I get little indications that my grandfather is with me. Like today, I made myself laugh and was thinking about some insights that were also funny. And the gas uh, central heater came on, and the control showed it was on, but it was definitely off. I even had controls replaced. It's him because he was saying you're getting warmer as in closer to the destination. I had the controls off. I used to get flicking lights, but I don't like it, and he doesn't do it. I also get little pinpoints of light winking at me. It's him. Yeah, it may very well be true. I mean, it is true because you say it is, and these are psychic facts that cannot be denied, even though they are not physical facts. So uh, let us see if we can get away from this idea that things are not facts just because you can't see and touch them, because they are facts in the psyche. Um, yeah, Cherie says Carl Jung is mentioned a lot in Dr. Ian McGilchrist's book, The Matter with Things. Okay, there's a conclusion to this article. It's got 2 pages, so I need to get through this before we wrap up for today. All right, so conclusion and a remark on Elijah. The figures of the unconscious, as Jung and the analytical psychology see it, are real and not symbols, as Elijah teaches Jung in one of their early dialogues. They shape our life more than our ego imagines. Active imagination, as documented in the Red Book, shows Jung's attempt to actively come to an interactive exchange with these forces, to form them into images and to interpret them. Jung called this endeavor the necessary second part of the analysis. The encounter would have a great impact on his conscious attitudes throughout the rest of his life. Around 1913, in the midst of a crisis after the split from Freud and around critical relationships to his wife, Emma, and his former patient, Sabina Spielrein and Tony Wolfe, he experienced inner images of a woman whom he called his soul, later termed uh, the anima, a personification of the female soul in the man. For Jung, this figure appeared as Salome, a threatening figure in the New Testament. And obviously, it's threatening because Salome took John the Baptist's head, very much as my wife took my head, figuratively speaking. In this essay, I have explained some aspects of the multi-layered dynamics of this relationship. It relates to the cultural complex of the femme fatale, in particular to the figure of Lou Andreas Salome, whose name, obviously not by chance, reminds us of Salome in Jung's vision. Lou was a prominent advocate in her time for women's empowerment. I have also referenced the work of Nietzsche, Rilke, Oscar Wilde, and Richard Strauss to illustrate the cultural situation and possible influences on Jung. It is also about Sabina Spielrein, Tony Wolfe, and Emma Jung. We know from clinical work that dream figures seldomly and only on the level of the objective interpretation can be reduced to real persons. They may represent certain aspects of living persons, but they stand with another leg in the other world of the collective unconscious, of mythology, and the realm of archetypes of the human psyche. From there comes their transforming capacity. Animus and anima are processes and archetypal functions of the psyche. To observe and to deal with them may profoundly change conscious attitudes. The creative shaping of these encounters has a positive impact on the ego complex. This is when the Red Book is what this is what the Red Book is about. The Salomé imaginations of Jung were deep reflections about his inner female side and his attitude and behavior toward women. I suppose that all the people around him profited from his work. It is not only a thrilling image from the early days of Jungian psychoanalysis, but also an example for the timeless topical issues of love, dependence, emancipation, and autonomy. Under this perspective, it makes really sense to put the anima in her own on her own feet. The anima is a gift from the self. Her connecting function on the ego self axis between the wisdom of the self and the ego complex will work only if the ego does not claim the anima to be its property. Otherwise, the ego will be in the hands of the anima and stay in an unconscious entanglement. Jung's insight and decision finally allowed him to find the way to a new and transcending God image. Take a glass of water here. Okay. In reading the documents, we have to listen carefully and with the greatest respect to the words of those who are no longer living. Often biographies are careless about the responsibility in this regard. Sometimes we have to read between the lines and listen, so to speak, for a small whisper may come to us. In this respect, Elijah the prophet in Jung's imagination may tell an interesting story. And with this amplification, I conclude my essay. Elijah's story is told in First Kings. He is the only person in the Bible to ascend to heaven alive, and legend has it that he will return when the Messiah appears. In the trouble reading this, sorry. In a courageous argument with the priests of Baal, Elijah convinced God to show his superiority over other gods. His offering was set aflame from above and accepted by God, whereas Baal's priests were shown unable to and lost the competition. The scene ends with Elijah slaughtering all the priests of the false god. From there, the story of Elijah continues. He flees into the desert because Queen Jezebel wants to kill him. There, God gives him food and drink by sending ravens with bread and water. Elijah spends 40 days walking through the desert to Mount Horeb, and there he hides in a cave, still in fear of his enemies. It is incubation in utter loneliness. Then God brings him out, saying, "Go out and stand on the mountains on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Elijah obeys, expecting the voice of God. This is the voice of his unconscious. Quote, now there was a kind of wind so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind, and after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake, and after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him that said, what are you doing here, Elijah? Okay, that's the end of it. Sorry, I got a little bit hypnotized by my own reading, as sometimes happens, especially when I don't have somebody to work with. Um, so next, I will come to the YouTube channel, but next week we will be reading starting on page, what is it? Okay, it's page 215 of Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Murray Stein and Thomas Arst. Volume 2. It's volume 2 of the series. Okay, now let me come back to the YouTube. So Deborah says, because of the insights and the timing, I was thinking, what is the deeper message? Because getting colder means away from the destination. Getting warmer means getting closer. Cherie, I don't think Dr. McGilchrist leaves out anyone. For some reason, my glasses are not helping me much today. I'm not as mentally active with reading as you, Shuri. I try to integrate what I can as I am going. Salome is so symbolic. And then Deborah says, like men are afraid of women who laugh at them, women are afraid of men who will kill them. Salome definitely got ahead of that one. Ahead. And Cherie says, after this, I will go back to listening to the independent UK Gaza tribunal that was on September 5th, 2025, with Jeremy Corbyn and 29 others discussing the Palestinian issue. It is 4 hours long somehow. Cherie says it got blocked. My dreams will come true sooner than one thinks. 150 years of Dionism. Carl Jung understood these things. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, phew. Sometimes these sessions just hypnotize me because they become so unlike our day-to-day life that they force our minds to go in every which way but loose. And so if you go to my Answer to Job reading, at one point you'll see me, I'm reading along an Answer to Job, and all of a sudden, and I fall asleep, and then I wake up and start reading again. But it finally came to me that I'm hypnotizing myself, and because the complexity of the ideas is essentially a classic hypnotic induction. And so I'm doing it to myself. Oh my God, I hope I wake up every time. Anyway, okay. And Sherry says, my dreams will come true sooner than one thinks. 100 years of Zionism. Carl Jung understood these things. Well, I would say that if this is a reference to Gaza, I think the consequences of the Gaza-Israel war are will go on for generations. There's no doubt about that. We'll be lucky if it's over 150 years. Deborah says it's so important to connect. I do hope nobody's equanimity was disturbed by my references to my early experience. I honestly feel okay about it, like it's a bit of a historical path to take for each of us. Uh, I'm sure he says I will share my dreams one day. Well, Deborah, it, please don't worry about um, sharing things like this on this channel, at least, because um, these these issues that are raised are we all face them, and it is indeed, it's I've come to understand that it is the purpose of this YouTube channel, which has now been going for nearly a decade, um, to serve for the audience here, and there's often 10 or 15 people watching live. Uh, it is a kind of church. It's a I don't propose it as a bona fide religion, not at all, but um, I think what people get out of it is the healing of their own unconscious. And when we say things that talk about different issues of the human species, I think we often kick off some thoughts in everybody's mind, and that's why we do it. Okay, and that's why all religions do what they do, and they all are correct. They all do it properly. Um, and so I'm against the idea that one religion is truer than another. So Deborah says, not in the same way. It's pretty intense, but my point is it's okay. I'm at peace with my situation. Well, that's good to hear. Um, I think it's a gift when people share their stories. I think it's a gift to the other people in the group. And um, anyway, I find myself dozing off, so I think I better call a halt here. But uh, if you're interested in our advanced reading group, please do join us. And I will very quickly get the link for the advanced reading group so that you can find us on Wednesdays. We are there every Wednesday at 5 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Excuse me, see what I mean? I put myself right to sleep. All right, here we go. Okay. Here is the link with the password for the Wednesday seminar. It's a advanced seminar on similar topics. But for those that know, and so you're all invited to join us, and um, hopefully we'll gradually gain some more participants over time. Now, for some reason, okay. Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm going to have to close my eyes here, so I'm just going to sign off and say peace to everyone, and I'll see you on Wednesday. Wednesday is 5 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. You can join us. Peace.